I am so excited to introduce to you all a new friend of mine. Imagine that. I love introducing the friends that God brings into my life, and just it's always interesting the way that he connects us, and isn't that how life is? So today I have Elaine Briefman with me, and Elaine has just such a wonderful story, and we're going to get into that. But first of all, Elaine, I just want to say welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today, and tell us just a little bit about you and what you're doing these days.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to come and share. And right now, I do an online program helping Christians overcome self-doubt and also teach them professional speaking skills.
Yes, yes, wonderful. And that is so important because I feel like, we all know that we are called to speak out when God gives us the opportunity to do that, but it's so difficult to get out of our own way sometimes to share what sometimes it's even our story, and I always laughingly say, well, it's my story. If I can't tell it, who can, right?
Right.
But there's, Satan wants us to be afraid that somebody's going to judge us for our story. And
And one of the things that I really enjoy helping people with is to say, I'm going to expand my comfort zone instead of step outside my comfort zone, because that's scary. But if I'm going to expand my comfort zone, I'm bringing something into my comfort zone. And so sharing my story can be part of that comfort zone. Yeah.
and you have a great format, if you will, to help people do just that on your website, right?
Yes.
And I think that that's really cool. And I don't know if that's something, maybe you want to just touch on it just a little bit to kind of, I mean, you don't have to do the teaching moment. We can send them to your website for that and I'll give them a link. But tell us just a little bit about what that looks like.
So I took professional speaker training because I am a pastor and I wanted to be able to speak more effectively. And I thought of all the entrepreneurial things that crossed my path, it was called Messenger Maker. And I thought, okay, that sounds like something I could do. And it was professional speaking training. And I am the kind of person who likes to take complicated things and whittle them down and boil them down into the most basic things that people need to know and understand. And I created a 5 sentence framework for you to tell your story. So if you say it right, it could come down to like 3 sentences maybe. And it makes it super easy and it makes it fun. And I just love teaching it. So that is on the homepage of my website at the bottom of my website. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what I love about that is honestly, as an entrepreneur, we're supposed to come up with our value statement. I can't tell you how many iterations of my value statement I have come up with. And one of the best advice that I've ever gotten from another coach of mine was, you know what? When you meet somebody, you don't come up and give them a canned, this is what it is. You just, when they say, what do? You just sincerely say what comes to mind, what the Holy Spirit leads you to in that moment, right?
Right.
Like, yeah. And she's like, so why are you so hung up on the value statement, this can statement? I was like, oh, that was so empowering to do that. But I do like that you give that format to kind of just think about the pieces, parts that maybe should come into our story, because people do clam up, and especially in that moment when you get asked that question. If you at least, it doesn't have to be in any special order or any certain words, but if you kind of know what parts they need to plug in, that's very helpful, right?
Yeah, it should be a joy. It should be a joy to be able to share that this is my before and after. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it should be a joy. It should be easy and a normal part of our conversation, especially as Christians in community. We should be able to do that easily. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first time that we visited, we talked a lot about identity and all of that. And you shared your, not, you call it the story, which is a little different than your story that you're going to share here in a minute. And I just want to tell the listeners that we recorded that separately. And it basically the day that we're doing this recording, which will be, several days behind us now when people are listening to this, but it was my birthday, and we recorded that because it's basically talking about the day that God created each and every one of us in our unique way. And I'm just encouraging the listeners to if you haven't already heard or seen that, to go find it on my site, or on my YouTube page, or on Elaine's YouTube page. It's so beautiful, and it's just such a gift. And so we're not going to do it here because we want people to go find it, because it just it deserves its own platform, I believe. So anyway, but identity is so important, and it's such an important thing in our world today, because Satan's messing with a lot of us, and messing with who we are, confusing us about where we belong, and what we're supposed to be thinking about ourselves. And he's been really effective at that in a lot of lives. And so I love the work that you're doing. I love the fact that you're helping people see themselves the way that God sees them. And that is so important. But what I would love for you to do right now, if you wouldn't mind, is to just tell us your story and how you got to be to the place that you're at right now.
Okay, thank you. I tell people it's a hard story. It starts off really rough, but it ends well. So you just have to kind of tolerate the beginning. And I let people know that I was adopted as a baby, and it's kind of important to remember that as I tell the story. But when I was about 8 years old, my mom called me into the living room, and so that was in an era where you're supposed to be seen and not heard. And so I figured I was probably in trouble for something, or I had a chore to do. So I walked down the hallway, and my dad was sitting on the couch behind the newspaper, and my mom was standing in the doorway, so I could kind of see my dad past my mom. And my mom just turned and looked at me, and she said, "Your brother tells me that your dad's been doing stuff to you. Is that true?" Now I'm 8 years old, and that freaked me out because I didn't expect it. And you don't lie to your parents, and I didn't know what to say. And he's sitting right there. And so I just said yes. And she turned and she looked at my dad, and she said, "Is that true?" And he says, "I don't know what she's talking about." And he never looked up from the newspaper. So we had this kind of weird conversation that maybe lasted all of a minute. But at one point he said, "I don't recall what she's talking about." And I got really mad. And I'm like, "What do you do?" And I started yelling. I'm like, "What do you mean you don't remember it happened yesterday? It happens all the time." And I'm waiting for my mom to slap me. I mean, because you just don't yell. I mean, the era that I was bringing, you just don't yell at your parents. But the weird part is that nothing happened, and literally nothing happened. He never looked up from the newspaper. She never followed up with that, and nothing ever changed. And when we're lied about or lied to, it can really mess with our sense of self and our identity, our sense of self-worth, and it can mess us up. And it really messed me up. And it made me realize that my voice doesn't matter. If I have something important to say, no one's going to pay attention, and nothing's going to change. And I was so messed up. I was hospitalized 5 times in 1 year for depression by the time I was 30. And so I did what any good jacked up person would do. I became a licensed marriage and family therapist and an ordained pastor. So I jokingly tell people I became a professional codependent. So you might be codependent. I just get paid more than you do. so so I really thought, after 13 years of my own personal therapy, and then 11 years of college, and then I performed professional therapy for 17 years. And I honestly believed I could help anybody. I mean, I was really into that mindset with God, and with all my education experience, I could help anybody. But I noticed that my clients were getting stuck, and it was kind of frustrating because they were genuinely wanting to get better. They were working really hard. They would come, they would pay, they'd do the thing, they'd do their homework, but they would still get stuck. And I was sitting on my couch one day, just pondering that thought and thinking, why? And I had this one particular client of mine, and that was just blowing up their life by focusing on this one thing, even though there were so many other things they were talented at. And I'm like, why would anybody do that? And I heard two words. Would you like to know what they are?
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Identity abuse. Say that out loud. Identity abuse. I want everybody to remember those 2 words,
Yes.
identity abuse. Now, we'd heard of sexual abuse and physical abuse, and I would have never put those 2 words together because they're kind of ethereal. You're like, how does your identity get abused? So I really, honestly, 100% believe those were God's words that he gave me in that moment in time. And I spent 3 days from a professional standpoint and as a Christian standpoint, evaluating if my identity that God gave me was abused, what would it do to me? And what it showed me that there's a diagnostic and statistics manual that all therapists use in the state of California, and it has all these disorders in it. And it showed me that the majority of non-biological emotional disorders can be explained by identity abuse, because people were believing a lie because it felt true. So I found that my identity was abused before I was even old enough to know I had an identity. So I believed the lie, and then it felt true because it was like all of my life. This is what I believed because it felt true. The lie felt more true than the truth. So when somebody came to tell me truth, I couldn't receive it because I'm like, that there's no way. It creates this mentality of impossibility. And so I went back to my clients, and the staff of the church I was at. I was all excited. I go to the whiteboard and I'm like, oh, God showed me this and this, and we're scribbling, and everybody's kind of like looking at me, kind of funny. But I went to my clients and just really explained this process that you're believing an old lie and that you can choose to not do that. And just watching them grow, it was just phenomenal. So I thought, how can I create a process that takes people from this disbelief in the truth about who they are into the wholeness that God intended? And I did it in person for a while at the church that I was at, and it was I did it with some youth that were in divorcing situations, and just watching the little light bulbs coming on, and it was just so much fun to do, that I thought if I do it on a more public platform, that more people could have access to it. So I did make a digital course, and then I did do coaching, and then so I have all of that kind of stuff. And I bought the URL identityabuse.com, and people are like, wow, you got that? And I'm like, these are God's words. Nobody's heard of it before, And so it was really easy to access. And so it covers three things. And so these are three things that I try to get everybody to remember. The first is that your uniqueness is eternally valuable to God. And I get people to say that my uniqueness is eternally valuable to God. It's not going to feel true, likely the first time you say it, but it is true. And then the second thing is the enemy is going to lie to you every moment of every day, constantly. There's going to be constant negative messages, and you can learn how to detect the lies. And then the third is you can choose. You can choose to believe the truth, even when it doesn't feel true. It's a choice. Everything that we believe, we have chosen. And so I would like to tell people at the end that thankfully 13 years later, when the police came knocking on my door, I was able to tell the truth, and my dad did go to jail. And so I tell people, you can choose, right? The truth will set you free. When you choose to know, the truth will set you free. And that is my story.
Wow. Wow. So I just have to take a minute.
Yeah, and that's why I tell people it starts off really rough, but it ends well. There's a lot in there. Absolutely.
And the question that's coming up for me is, first of all, it's not even a question. The first thing that I think of is the fact that as children, we want to love our parents above all, right? So have you been able to forgive your father? Have you been able to reconcile to him at all, or is that still just out there?
It was that was a really big struggle, obviously. It would be
Yeah,
for anybody. And
yeah,
I went through a process where I thought I forgave him because I'm like, well, I don't want to be around him, and I don't trust him because I mean nobody would have him babysit their kids, right?
right.
And I went through this kind of mental thing of saying, well, I forgive him. And I didn't really understand the deeper processes of that. Um and I had a situation where I was teaching a class on forgiveness, and we were supposed to bring a stone and write the name of somebody we need to forgive on it. And every time I thought about this class, I kept thinking about my dad. I'm like, I don't want to think about my dad. I don't want to. It's like I forgave him. Why do I have to do this? So that in the middle of the class, it's like, okay, I gave everybody the little rocks. We had little pens, and I'm looking at my rock, and I just wrote dad, and I threw it in my purse. And then it was rolling around in the bottom of my purse for like the longest time, and every time I saw it, it was like so aggravating to me. And then I finally, God showed me, and this is a very hard word, and I don't want anybody to condemn themselves if this is, or to misunderstand me when I say this. But God showed me that when Jesus was on the cross, he forgave the people who were in the process of killing him, while they were in the process of killing him. And God asked me, could I forgive my dad while he was in the process of molesting me?
Mm.
That would be how deep it would have to go. And I was really puzzled by that question until I went to the next statement when Jesus said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And And I know that the day came, because my dad did pass away, and there will be a judgment, that when my dad stands before God in the judgment and he sees in his right mind all of the damage that he did, and he's repentant, I said, then please forgive him. Because I believe that my dad had some serious mental issues. He's likely was abused as a child himself. And so that helped me kind of go through that process of saying, okay, here's a demented person. And I can say, wow, I can forgive him for this, because he really genuinely doesn't understand the full capacity of what he's doing. And it was proven by some of the court documents as well. And in the end, I actually held his memorial service. Um, and it was good to have some of the people from my history there, have my dad, my brother there. And it was very ill attended, as would be expected, but it was kind of a healing time for all of us who had gone through the history together, to kind of verbalize, our own pains and struggles, but then being able to let it go. Yeah.
This may or may not be a question you want to answer. Have you forgiven your mother?
It was easy to forgive my mom,
Was it?
because my mom, I believe that my mom took advantage of my dad. I mean, my dad took advantage of my mom, and my mom was extremely naive. She was raised in a very strict Catholic home. My dad had a pornography addiction, and I believe he abused her. And she was, I believe in that moment, she could not conceive in her mind that something like that would be happening in her own home.
Yeah.
And I remember years later, we went to the movies and we were sitting at the table at lunch afterwards. And she said, "How come you never told me?" And I said, "I did." And I could see her going back through her memory of her mind. And then she said, "How come you never said anything anymore?" And I said, "Well, you didn't believe me the first time. So why would I assume you'd believe me the second time?" And so it was easier to have grace. There's people who are mad at me for having grace for my mom, but my mom didn't do anything to me. My dad was the one that was doing it to me. My mom could have intervened, yes, but I believe that she really honestly was ignorant beyond the capacity to make a change.
So we we know what's hard about the story is the fact that we all want to believe that God doesn't allow these kinds of things to happen, that a good God would never allow a child to go through what you went through. And we know that it happens time and time again in places that we would never imagine. And I've had similar conversations on other episodes in the past. When you have that conversation with somebody, and maybe they're trying to deny that there is a God because that happened, well, how do you respond to that?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. I know that it comes up rather frequently, as you can imagine. And I tell people that God put the world into motion, and he created the laws of gravity that we're glad work when we want them to, right? And all of these, the laws of nature, and he gave us free will. And to be able to say that God is supposed to intervene every time somebody's doing something bad, it would become a God that we don't trust, and a God that we would expect to do whatever we want whenever we ask. And it would keep us from being responsible for ourselves, because we would be able to go do bad things and know the bad things would not have the consequences, right, that they do now. And that doesn't mean that God isn't not good, because he actually is good in the sense that he allows us to choose, he allows us to love, he allows us that freedom to do those things. And the joy that comes in choosing him and choosing right helps us understand more so when people are wayward and they're not living in the will of God, that he created the 10 commandments for our own safety, not because he's mean.
Yeah.
And sometimes that helps people.
Well, and truly there are times when not times, I believe, I can't think of a time when he hasn't, but he has used tragedies in our life, whether it's the identity abuse or the sexual abuse or whatever. He uses those things to help draw us closer to him and help us to learn to rely on him and count on him. And yeah, so it's
He
hard
can
to
he can
fathom.
take anything he can make beauty from ashes, and that's absolutely true. And yet I do not want anybody to believe that God causes these things to happen for our own growth, because there are people who will say that.
Yes.
And he can cause us to grow, but there's some people who don't survive, right? And they don't make it out. And I'm super grateful. I'm dumbfounded that I made it as far as I did with the psychological issues that I had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So were you in a church at that point in your life when, I mean,
I was raised in the church. They raised me in the church, and also private school. So I was in church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, vacation Bible school, every day of the week at Christian school through fourth grade. And we said Lord's Prayer every night, and we had devotions every night after dinner, and no drugs, no alcohol, no swearing, no eating out on Sundays, no dancing, no smoking, no, yeah. Yeah. So that was the way I was brought up. So it became a way of life for me. It had zero meaning to me whatsoever. But when my dad went to jail, I went to my pastor. We were all going to the same church. Okay, we're talking serious dysfunction. I just so I'm totally aware of how dysfunctional this whole thing was. Um, and my dad actually went to a white collar jail because of the era that this all occurred. And he would come home on the weekends and go to jail during the week. And he would show up at church as though nothing happened. And I actually had to go tell the pastor, did you know? Da, 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 da. And so then he was working for an organization. He was really close to retirement. And they said, if you don't come back to work, you're going to lose your job and your retirement. So they let him go to jail on the weekends so he could go to work during the week. And so I went to my pastor. I'm like, hey, I think I need some counseling. And he's like, well, what do you want to get out of it? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And I was 22 at the time. And so I made this little list. He says, make a list, made a little list, went back, and I read the list, and it said better relationship with my parents, better relationship with my brothers. And I don't remember what else was on there, but he said, where do you want to start? I said, my relationship with God. And I need you to understand that it wasn't on the list. I had not thought about it ahead of time. At nowhere in my rational mind did I say I'm going to a church, which is a religious institution, to go speak to a man of the cloth about my spiritual condition. It never passed through my mind because all of that was just part of my life. And so he asked me, well, where is your relationship with God? And I did not know how to answer the question because up to that point, nobody had ever looked me in the eye and asked me about my relationship with God.
mm,
So I just said, I don't know. And he said, did you ever ask Jesus in your heart? And I said, well, yeah, when I was 5 during vacation Bible school, my brother made me go down to the altar and I cried because I didn't want to go. And the man that came to pray with me got mad because I wouldn't stop crying. And the pastor goes, is that it? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, oh, well, we can fix that right now. And I'm like, okay. And we walked out of his office into the foyer, down into the sanctuary, down the aisle to the altar, and did a simple sinner's prayer. Changed the rest of my life. And that's why I tell people we have to get to the place where we're able to talk to people about our spiritual condition. And the coolest part about my conversion is the following Sunday. So I was raised in the era of hymns, and I knew every hymn. I was bathed in it my entire life. I knew all 5 verses, could sing them backwards, and we're standing in church that following Sunday singing the hymns, and I got my little hymnal out and I'm singing along, and all of a sudden it's like this light bulb went on, and I'm like, these songs are about me. These songs are about me and forgiveness and God and Jesus. And I'm looking around the room going, did everybody else know this but me? And I'm like, are you serious? And I was like, I was so excited that, wow, that this is really about me. And it brought it all to life, because prior to that, it was just really a way of living. It wasn't alive in me.
wow. Now we're talking. And not to negate your whole story and everything, but I really, to me, that's part of my story too, is, I grew up in the church, and yes, I wandered away, and I mean, that's a whole different episode, and actually it's been talked about in episodes and books and all the things, but until you don't know what you don't know, but until you know that you can have a deep relationship with Jesus and that will change your life, you can go through the motions and you can sit in that pew and you can say your prayers and you can even do your Bible studies and everything. But until that switch gets flipped, it's all, I mean, and I think it's part of the process. And I think, everybody, it flips at different times for everybody, but it's such a huge thing. And it it troubles me that there are people in this world that think they've got it and they don't even know what's on the other side. And truly, that's why.
And they don't know they don't know.
Right, right.
They're
And that's why
working
this is.
really hard, and yeah, they do their devotions and they read their thing and they go to church and they do the prayers and they assume, and they don't know. It's like, I just did a post yesterday and I said Christianity is a relationship to experience, not an education on behavior modification.
Yes, yes. So, and that's why this is called longing for more. It's because we all walk around knowing in our heart that there's got to be more to life. This can't be all, and we touched on it before we hit record, and the fact that we're all in this hurry, got to rush, 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 and do all the things. And Jesus is just sitting there going, "Oh, honey, come.
Be still.
I have a better way." And all of those hymns that you just referenced really do speak to that peace that he wants us to have. I actually just did my first post on LinkedIn this week. Not post, I've been posting for a long time, but I did an article. And, as I mentioned, celebrating my birthday in 62. And I remember back in my early career, 62 was elderly. We were building housing to put people into when they turned 62. Please don't put me in one of those now. I'm just not ready. But it's at that mindset. And I realized that things that I thought I knew all the way back then, I didn't have the picture. And there's so much more to life. And it's not rushing, and it's not all the things the world tells us is the way to go. So, yeah.
I think one of the things, and I was on retreat last week, and one of the things that I came across was this idea that we are spiritual beings in an earthly body, not human beings that occasionally have a spiritual experience.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. So, one of the things that I like to ask all of my guests is if they have a favorite verse that they would like to share with the audience. Can you tell me what yours is?
Yes, absolutely. My favorite is John 8:32. John 8:32.
Which,
And this is where Jesus is sitting with his disciples, and he says that if you are truly my disciples, and then you will bathe yourself in my word, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So it doesn't say the truth might set you free if you work hard enough. It doesn't say someday the truth will set you free. It says you will know the truth and it will set you free. And I ask people often, are you known for being free? Do people look at you and go, oh yeah, she's very free? And that's part of your demeanor. And if not, why not? And I think it's a really great question to ponder, but just to know that Jesus tells us the truth sets us free. So looking at the lies that we believe, the truth sets us free. It doesn't say our emotions set us free, and our thinking sets us free, but the truth sets us free.
yeah, yeah. And freedom is entirely different than, not entirely, because there are so many parallels, but it is different than what we think. It's not the freedom to do anything we want. Actually, it is. Once we get in alignment, what we want is in alignment with what God
Exactly.
wants.
Yeah.
So it is
There's
that freedom. But
and
yeah.
I did a video one time, and the opening line is, what would it be like if you were freed from all self-doubt?
Mm.
Just imagine, that's what it says. Imagine a day when you are freed from all self-doubt. Just thinking about that, you can feel there would be a freedom. And so this isn't freedom, the harem scarum run around kind of freedom. It's just the freedom from the bondage of the things that the enemy puts in our way.
Yeah. Yeah. So Elaine, I am sure that there are people that are listening today that are going to be like, "Ooh, I need more of that," or "I want to, I have a similar experience," or "I know somebody that does," or I'm really interested in this whole identity thing," or freedom. I mean, we talked about so many things. It could be any one of those things. How can people find you? What would be an easy way for them to connect with you if they want to do that?
So an easy way is to go to identityabuse.com, identityabuse.com. And it has a way that it has a contact link on there on the website.
Okay.
And it has the video, it has the story of the video, it has the teaching, how to share your story video right on
Okay.
the homepage. So it's, yeah, all right there.
Excellent. Excellent. Any last thoughts that you have for the listeners today that maybe we haven't talked about that is important for them to know?
So typically before I ever speak, I ask God, what do the people need to hear? And this is what he said to tell you guys, you are enough. You are enough. Words from God for you today.
Excellent. And yeah, it I don't need to even put a cap on that. I'm just going to be quiet. My listeners are surprised by that because I've always got something, but no, just going to let it rest right there. So, friend, I just thank you so much. And I'm so grateful that you learned early on that you are enough and that your identity is not in your story. Your identity is in his story. And that is so beautiful. And I'm just so glad that he caused us to bump into each other. I don't even remember exactly
I don't either.
which call it was or whatever. It was designed by him and beautifully so. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And I just pray that you will continue to live your more.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.